大家好，我是 Olive Branch 的 Alan. So today we're going to be talking about salt, and specifically if eating too much salt is bad for you and what the science says about that. So you probably have heard from your doctor or your parents, maybe some friends, that eating a lot of salt is not good for you. You might have heard that it causes high blood pressure. The question is why? Well, in your body, what happens is when you eat a lot of salt or sodium chloride, your blood vessels will draw more water from your tissues into your bloodstream. This naturally will cause an increase in pressure in the blood vessels. And so this is true. The question is this really bad for you? Well, yes, having blood pressure going up is not great, especially if you've already have chronic hypertension, which is high blood pressure. Then it might actually tip it over the scales and you might run into some trouble. Like a heart disease, heart attack, stroke. But if you don't have chronic hypertension, then the thing that you need to understand, having a salt intake immediately will cause blood pressure to rise, but it actually goes down relatively soon thereafter. So it's not really a big problem for the long term if you don't have chronic hypertension. Man, this is the heavy science. The renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. This is a hormonal system that runs in your body. It's self-regulating.
Okay.
And what happens is when you have too little salt, what happens is your body or your kidneys and your lungs, it starts to emit what's called angiotensin, which is this chemical in your body that reacts with ACE or angiotensin converting enzyme. And when they mix together, it forms angiotensin 2.
Okay.
Once you have that, then it actually starts to produce a whole bunch of problems. Okay, so for one, angiotensin 2 causes the sympathetic nervous system to activate. Now, the sympathetic nervous system, you might have heard sometimes, it's becoming more and more popular. It's the fight or flight syndrome, which basically means when you're really scared or you're really angry, your adrenaline's pumping and you want to fight, or you want to run away because you're scared, like you're being chased by a lion. So that's the flight. Furthermore, with angiotensin 2 being upregulated, your aldosterone start pumping from the adrenal cortex, which is just the hormone which helps you to retain salt. So when you don't have enough salt, your body tries to keep the salt it does have through this hormone called aldosterone. Now, having this on all the time is actually not good for you because it's highly inflammatory. It might cause kidney disease, osteoporosis, which is when your bones get brittle, and it increases blood pressure actually. And what it also does is it starts to get your body to reabsorb the sodium in your bloodstream. It pulls it back in, and because your body is really well regulated in terms of balancing sodium and water and potassium, it has to dump a lot of potassium back out. So you excrete potassium. And at the same time, you absorb more water. So all of this is to say is that your bloodstream gets now a lot more impacted with all these substrates moving in and out, causing more substances in the bloodstream, increasing your blood pressure. So having a low salt intake actually causes higher blood pressure. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but that's actually according to this RAA system, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So when you actually have low salt, they actually did a lot of studies based on this, and one from the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, actually took a lot of adults and they tested them on a low salt diet, a high salt diet to see the outcome. And so what they found was that actually by eating a lot of salt, the participants of the study peed out a lot of salt. So the body, once again, does a really good job. And when I say the body, I really mean the kidneys. It does a really good job. If you eat too much salt, it excretes it out in your urine. And if you have too little salt, it keeps on whatever salt you have left. And so the pee that you pee out has less salt. And so that's how the body really regulates the sodium in and sodium out. So no matter what you eat in terms of how much salt intake, your body actually does a good job to maintain homeostasis or the balanced level. So in other words, it doesn't really give you too much control to harm it when it comes to salt. And the next study actually goes into a little bit more detail by the New England Journal of Medicine, actually shows you a chart where by continuing to eat more and more salt, the risk of getting cardiovascular disease or stroke, it does increase, but very little, subtle increase. But at a certain point between 4 to 6 grams of salt per day, if you eat past 6, that's when it starts to creep up a bit more in terms of risk to cardiovascular health. The other side is if you have too little salt. When you have too little salt, the risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke goes up much faster. So if you actually don't have 4 grams of salt, the risk of getting disease jumps up much more than if you have too much salt. So once again, your kidneys are really good with disposing too much salt, but if you don't have enough salt in your diet, your body has no way of getting it in. So there is a risk one way more than the other way. Another reason why they say eating a lot of salt is not good for you is partly because a lot of people eat a lot of junk food or processed food, which does contain a lot of salt. But what it also contains, which I believe is also a big culprit, is a lot of sugar and a lot of bad fat. So when you have all these ingredients in a meal that's just not that healthy, it's really hard to parse out which is the main culprit for causing disease. If you look at South Korea, they actually have a really high salt diet, and that's a lot to do with their kimchi intake. But if you look at the cardiovascular disease, it's actually really low. And you can also substitute South Korea with 13 other countries with a natural, traditional diet that they eat, which is very high in salt, but very low in cardiovascular disease. Lastly, there's one more study that was shown that if you have a low salt diet, especially if you're pregnant, it really actually affects the growth of your fetus, and it can have a lot of complications to the development of their nervous system. So again, I'm not here to tell you what you should or should not eat, but these are studies that are out there, and I highly recommend that you look into them. So there you have it, guys. I have laid out the evidence for you in terms of what happens if you have too little salt and what happens if you have too much salt. Well, your body is really well equipped to deal with too much salt. It just excretes it down your urine. But if you have too little salt, there's a lot of health complications that comes with it. So the choice is yours. I'm not a doctor, so please don't take this as medical advice. Do your own research and please consult a doctor. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below or follow me on my WeChat official account. Until then, take care. See you guys.